A daughter caught her billionaire father exchanging secret folders. When she revealed what she saw, shocking secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment on where you are watching from. The morning sun on Tuesday filtered through the large windows of the penthouse on the Upper East Side, creating golden reflections on the Italian marble floor that Robert Miller had imported specifically to impress clients during home meetings. At 45 years old, the real estate mogul bore the weight of an empire built brick by brick, contract by contract, since he became a widower 3 years ago. His greying hair at the temples contrasted with his still youthful brown eyes, which had lost some of their sparkle since the premature passing of Helena, his wife, a victim of an aggressive cancer that took her in just 6 months. "Dad, Aunt Clara is here!" shouted Matthew, 10 years old, running barefoot down the hallway toward the living room. The boy, a miniature version of his father, with the same expressive eyes and the same smile that used to disarm any tough negotiation, abruptly stopped when he noticed Robert was on the phone in the office. "Yes, Mauricio, I need those documents by Thursday. I won't accept any more delays in the approval process for the West Side project. We're talking about 20 million in investment." Robert spoke firmly into his cell phone, watching the morning hustle of Madison Avenue through the bulletproof glass he had installed after a competitor began making veiled threats. Clara Johnson, 38, appeared silently at the office entrance, as she had done for the past 2 years while working in the house. Her discreet presence was one of the qualities Robert appreciated most. Unlike other staff who had come and gone, she never interrupted his business calls or asked questions about matters that did not concern her. Of average height, with brown hair always tied back in a simple bun and neutral clothing that did not draw attention, Clara possessed a serene face that concealed a sharp intelligence behind her green eyes. Her delicate hands, which Robert had never noticed were so well cared for a domestic worker, moved with precision as she organized the papers scattered across the mahogany table. "Good morning, Mr. Robert. The coffee is ready. Would you like me to serve it here or in the dining room?" she asked softly, waiting for him to finish the call. Robert nodded affirmatively, indicating she should serve it right there. Clara discreetly left and returned minutes later with a silver tray containing a porcelain cup, refined sugar, and homemade cookies that she always prepared for Matthew, but which Robert had also begun to enjoy. "Sophia, come play hide and seek!" Matthew shouted from the hallway to Clara's 8-year-old daughter, who had arrived with her mother. It was Tuesday, the day Clara always brought the girl because the school she attended followed a different educational schedule. Sophia Johnson was a curious child, with golden curls that contrasted with her mother's green eyes and a liveliness that filled the house. Unlike Matthew, who had grown up among expensive toys and cutting-edge technology, Sophia demonstrated an impressive creativity in turning simple objects into sources of fun. "Okay, but you have to count to 30, replied Sophia, already running toward the back of the apartment. Robert involuntarily smiled. The presence of the two had brought a lightness to the house that had become too cold after Helena's death. In the first months after the mourning, he had considered moving to a smaller place, but Matthew had begged to stay, claiming he still felt his mother's presence there. 1, 2, 3... Matthew began counting, covering his eyes with his hands as he leaned against the wall of the main hallway. Clara silently organized the documents Robert had left, scattered after working late the night before. They were contracts for a new venture along the Hudson River, an ambitious project that could yield millions, but also involved complex approvals and partnerships with other business groups. 28, 29, 30, here I come. Matthew ran through the rooms, checking first his bedroom, then the guest bathroom, the kitchen, and the laundry area. His footsteps echoed through the 300-square-meter apartment, a sound Robert had learned to associate with the happiest moments since the family tragedy. Meanwhile, Sophia had found the perfect hiding spot, the space behind the leather armchair in Matthew's father's office. It was a place she had only discovered the previous week while helping her mother clean the living room. From there, she could hear everything happening in the room without being seen. Robert was again on the phone, this time discussing financial details with his accountant when the intercom bell rang. "Clara, can you see who it is?" he asked, covering the cell phone with his hand. "Of course, Mr. Robert." Sophia watched everything from her privileged position, finding it amusing to be an invisible spy. That was when she saw something that made her furrow her brow in confusion. Two men in dark suits entered the office, carrying leather folders that seemed too heavy for simple documents. "Punctuality is crucial in our business," said the taller one, around 50 years old, with a small scar on his left eyebrow and an accent that Sophia couldn't identify. "Your part of the deal is here." Clara closed the office door before Robert, still focused on his phone call on the balcony, realized what was happening right under his nose. "Are you sure you left no traces?" Clara asked in a low but firm voice. Sophia had never heard her mother speak in that tone. There was an authority there that was completely different from the sweet, submissive woman who cleaned the house every day. "Relax, Doctor, the system is working." "Perfectly. 3 years without any issues," replied the second man, shorter and chubby, as he opened one of the folders and showed documents that Sophia couldn't quite see, but were clearly not ordinary household work papers. "And the next targets?" Clara asked, receiving a second folder that she immediately tucked into her personal bag, the same synthetic leather bag that Robert always saw her carry, but had never paid attention to how large and well-structured it was. "The schedule is in the blue folder. We have 6 months to wrap everything up before the final operation," said the scarred man, glancing at the gold watch on his wrist. "We need to go. The doctor could return at any moment." Sophia felt her heart racing. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but instinctively knew this shouldn't be happening. Her mother, who always told her to tell the truth about everything, was clearly hiding something very important. "Thank you for being punctual. We'll see each other in the next fortnight," Clara said, accompanying the men to the office door. When they left, Clara stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath as if preparing to return to playing a role. She opened her bag, checked that the folders were securely stored, and resumed organizing Robert's papers as if nothing had happened. Sophia remained motionless, processing everything she had witnessed. Her mother had secrets, big secrets, and for some reason she couldn't understand. These secrets seemed to involve work much more important than just cleaning houses. "I found you." Matthew finally arrived at the office, discovering Sophia behind the armchair. "Wow, you're good at this. How long have you been here?" "Quite a while," Sophia replied, glancing at her mother, who now smiled normally, as if the last 15 minutes had never happened. Robert returned from the terrace at that moment, tucking his phone into the pocket of his navy blue dress shirt. "Everything all right here? I heard voices," he said, looking around the office, which was now impeccably organized. "It was just the kids playing, Mr. Robert. Do you want me to prepare lunch earlier today?" Clara replied with absolute naturalness. "No, you can keep the regular schedule. Thank you, Clara." Robert didn't notice the intense look that Sophia directed at her mother, nor how the girl remained quiet for the rest of the morning, lost in thoughts that were too big for her age to fully comprehend, but too important to be ignored. 3 days passed since the episode in the office, and Sophia couldn't shake the image of the mysterious men exchanging folders with her mother from her mind. During Friday dinner in her small 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, she watched Clara prepare pasta in the cramped kitchen, searching for signs that the woman who cooked for her every night was the same one who spoke so authoritatively about operations and schedules. "Mom, "Why do you never tell me about your work?" Sophia asked, stirring her fork in her plate with little appetite. Clara paused for a moment, her hand holding the wooden spoon in the air. "What do you mean, dear? You know I work cleaning houses." "But you never talk about the people, about what happens there," Sophia insisted, testing unfamiliar ground with the caution of a child who knew she was treading on something delicate. "There's not much to tell. I clean, organize, prepare food. That's it." Clara resumed stirring the sauce, but Robert Johnson had trained his daughter to observe details, and Sophia noticed how her mother's shoulders tensed. On Saturday morning, Robert was in his home office reviewing contracts when the doorbell rang. It was 8:30 in the morning, too early for social visits or scheduled deliveries. Through the intercom screen, he saw a man in his 40s, well-dressed, holding a briefcase. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Marcus Smith, private investigator. You requested my services?" The professional voice echoed through the sound system. Robert frowned. He hadn't requested investigative services, but something had been bothering him for days. A feeling that he had missed some important detail, a missing piece in a puzzle he didn't even know he was assembling. "There must be some mistake. I didn't request any investigation," he replied through the intercom. "Sir, I received an anonymous call stating that you needed to discreetly investigate a domestic worker. If it wasn't you, I apologize for the inconvenience." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. An anonymous call. Who could have an interest in him investigating Clara, and why? "Please hold on a moment," he said, granting entry to the building. When Marcus arrived at the apartment, Robert welcomed him into the living room. The investigator was a trustworthy-looking man with neatly cut dark hair and attentive eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the luxurious environment. "Mr. Johnson, I know this may seem strange, but in 20 years of my profession, I've learned that anonymous calls usually come from people who know important information but cannot expose themselves directly," Marcus explained, sitting in the leather armchair that Helena had chosen years ago. "Someone wants you to discover something about your employee. Clara has worked here for 2 years. I've never had any issues with her," Robert said. But even as he spoke, his mind began to replay small details he had ignored. Her refined education, her sometimes more elaborate vocabulary than expected, the way she organized his business documents with an efficiency that bordered on professional. "Do you have basic information about her? Documents, previous references?" Robert went to the personal file where he kept employee data. He pulled out a thin folder with Clara Johnson, handwritten on it. "Here's everything I have. ID, proof of residence, and a reference from the previous family she worked for." Marcus examined the documents with professional attention. "Mr. Johnson, I can do some basic checks at no cost. If I find anything relevant, we can discuss the next steps. What do you think?" Robert hesitated. Investigating Clara felt like a betrayal of the trust she had placed in him by taking care of his child with such dedication, affection. On the other hand, the responsibility of protecting Matthew outweighed any personal considerations. "Do the basic checks," he decided. On Monday, Clara arrived as always at 7 in the morning. Robert watched her with new eyes as she prepared the morning coffee for Matthew. There was something in her movements, a precision, an economy of gesture that he had never noticed before. She did not waste time or energy on unnecessary tasks, organizing the household routine with the efficiency of someone used to managing multiple responsibilities. "Clara, what grade did you finish?" he asked casually, while having coffee. "I finished high school, Mr. Robert. Why do you ask?" "Curiosity. Sometimes you use words that, well, sound like someone with more education." Clara smiled, but Robert caught a flash of something, alertness, caution, in her eyes before she responded. "I've always liked to read. I borrow books from the public library in the neighborhood." That afternoon, while Clara was cleaning the bathroom in the suite, Robert decided to do something he had never done: discreetly rummage through her bag. He felt like an intruder, but the conversation with the investigator had planted seeds of doubt that were growing rapidly. The bag was in the kitchen, on the counter where Clara always left it. Robert opened the main zipper, expecting to find the common items of any working woman: wallet, documents, maybe some cheap cosmetics. What he found left him perplexed. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a soft cloth, were 3 books: Criminal Law by Rogerio Greco, Civil Procedure by Freddie Didier Jr., and Criminal Investigation by an author Robert did not recognize. The books were clearly used, with in-pen markings and colorful post-its marking specific pages. Robert felt his hands tremble slightly. A housekeeper studying criminal law and criminal investigation. This made sense for someone aspiring to change their life, but the books were updated, recent, and expensive editions. Not the kind of material someone with Clara's salary could easily afford. He quickly took photos of the covers with his phone and put everything back exactly where it was. "Mr. Robert, do you need anything?" Clara's voice from the hallway made Robert jump. He closed the bag and stepped away from the counter. "No, thank you. I was just getting some water." Clara appeared in the kitchen, glanced at the bag for a second, long enough to notice if something had been moved, and continued her work as usual. That night, after Clara left, Robert called Marcus. "I found law books in her bag: criminal law, civil procedure, criminal investigation, expensive and updated books." "Interesting. Mr. Miller, I got the basic checks done. There are some inconsistencies in her documents." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The address she provided exists, but the neighbors say they've never seen any Clara Johnson living there. The reference from a previous family, the phone no longer exists, and I couldn't locate those people. Also, her social security number only started showing significant financial activity 3 years ago." Robert sat heavily in the armchair. "What does that mean?" "It could mean several things. She might be fleeing from an abusive relationship and created a partially false identity to protect herself. She could have legal issues. Or," Marcus paused, "or she could be working undercover for someone. Mr. Miller, do you have enemies, competitors who might want information about your business?" Robert thought of the million-dollar contracts, the fierce disputes over valuable land, the partnerships that didn't always end amicably. "I have some rivals in real estate, but Clara takes care of my son, Marcus. If she wanted to harm me, she would have had 1,000 opportunities. Maybe the goal isn't to harm you directly. Maybe she's gathering information." That night, Robert stayed awake, watching the illuminated city through the apartment windows. In the next room, Matthew slept peacefully, protected by the innocence of his 10 years. Robert wondered how many other protections he had taken for granted, how many other aspects of his orderly life might be built on less solid foundations than he had imagined. The woman who cared for his son, who knew every room in his house, every routine of his life, was a growing mystery. The month of June arrived in New York City, bringing the characteristic chill of winter, along with a series of events that would force Robert to confront realities he preferred to ignore. On the morning of an especially cold Wednesday, Matthew woke up with a high fever and a cough that echoed through the apartment's hallways like a harbinger of bigger problems. "Dad, I'm not feeling well," the boy murmured, his face flushed with the 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit that the digital thermometer confirmed. Robert, who had spent the entire night analyzing financial reports of a troubled venture in the South Side, felt the familiar panic that always struck him when Matthew got sick. Since Helen's death, every sign of illness in his son triggered traumatic memories of the last months of his wife, when seemingly harmless symptoms quickly evolved into something terminal. "Clara, can you come here, please?" he shouted, his voice carrying an urgency she recognized immediately. Clara appeared at Matthew's bedroom door in less than 30 seconds, still holding the cleaning cloth she had been using to tidy the living room. Her expression changed instantly when she saw the situation. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, approaching the bed with decisive movements that Robert noted were surprisingly professional. "He just woke up, but he was a bit lethargic at dinner last night," Robert replied, watching as Clara placed her hand on Matthew's forehead with a touch that demonstrated experience in assessing body temperature without a thermometer. "Matthew, do you feel pain anywhere specific in your throat, in your stomach, in your chest?" The sequence of questions Clara asked was exactly the same that any doctor would follow in an initial consultation. "A little in my throat and all over my body," Matthew replied in a hoarse voice. Clara stood up and went to the suite's bathroom, returning with a small flashlight that Robert didn't even know existed in his house. "Can you open your mouth? Could I take a look at his throat?" she kindly asked, using the flashlight with the precise technique of a healthcare professional. Robert watched, fascinated and disturbed, as she examined Matthew's tonsils with knowledge that went far beyond what any ordinary mother would possess. "It's not too red, but there's a bit of inflammation. I'll prepare some ginger tea with honey and lemon, and I think we should monitor his fever every 2 hours, Clara said, addressing Robert with a natural authority that momentarily made him forget who was giving orders to whom. "Do you think it's serious?" Robert asked, realizing how he had automatically transferred the responsibility of the situation to her. "It seems to be a common flu, but with children, it's always better to keep a close eye. If the fever goes over 102 degrees Fahrenheit, or if he starts having trouble breathing, then we need to worry." Robert stood still for a moment, processing not only her words, but the way she had diagnosed the situation. Clara spoke like someone who had assessed many fever cases before, using medical terminology with ease. "Clara, have you worked in healthcare?" The question came out more directly than Robert intended. Clara paused, a look of alertness crossing her face before being replaced by a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Not professionally, but when you're a mother of an 8-year-old girl, you learn to handle these situations," she replied. But Robert caught the evasiveness in her answer. Over the next few hours, Robert cancelled 2 important meetings to stay home, monitoring Matthew's condition. Clara took full charge of caring for the boy, preparing not only the medicinal tea she promised, but also a cold compress for the fever and a homemade syrup made with propolis that she said she always had on hand for Sophia. "Where did you get propolis?" "I don't remember having that in the kitchen," Robert asked, watching her mix ingredients with the precision of a pharmacist. "I always carry some basic supplies in my bag." "Mothers have to be prepared," she replied, but Robert noticed that her bag seemed to contain much more sophisticated medical supplies than usual. By around 3 in the afternoon, when Matthew's fever had dropped to 98.9 degrees Fahrenheit, Clara's phone rang. She looked at the screen, hesitated for a moment and answered, stepping away to the hallway. Robert, who was organizing papers in the office with the door slightly ajar, managed to hear fragments of the conversation. "I can't talk right now. I'm working," Clara said in a low voice. There was a long pause during which the person on the other end was clearly talking a lot. "I understand the urgency, but I need to maintain the cover," Clara replied, and Robert felt his heart race. Cover? What kind of domestic work required maintaining a cover? "The documents are secure. No one suspects anything." The conversation continued. Robert discreetly approached the door, trying to listen more. "Dr. Ferguson said we have 2 more weeks before the final phase. I can wait." The mention of Dr. Ferguson made Robert frown. Clara had never mentioned knowing any doctors, and the surname didn't sound American. The conversation abruptly ended when Clara realized Robert was approaching. "Sorry, Mr. Robert, it was from Sophia's school. Issues with her enrollment for the next semester," she explained, quickly putting away the phone. "Private school?" Robert asked, pretending to be casually uninterested. "No, public, but there's all this bureaucracy for neighborhood transfers." That night, after Clara left and Matthew was sleeping with his fever completely under control, Robert called Marcus. "I need more information about Clara. Several strange things happened today." Robert reported Clara's medical knowledge, the phone conversation he had partially overheard, and especially the mention of that Dr. Ferguson. "Mr. Miller, I got some new information. Her daughter Sophia is enrolled at St. Clara Academy in the West Village. It's a private school that costs about $2,000 a month." Robert felt his stomach tighten. $2,000? With the salary I pay her, that would be impossible. Exactly. Either she has other sources of income or someone is paying for the girl's education. Additionally, I checked the records of healthcare professionals. There is no Clara Johnson who graduated in medicine or nursing in the last 15 years in New York, but she clearly has medical knowledge. Which leads us to two possibilities. Either she studied medicine and didn't finish, or, Marcus hesitated, or she received medical training in unconventional contexts, armed forces, for example, or undercover work that required basic first aid knowledge. Robert ran his hand through his hair, feeling the weight of responsibility. "Marcus, I need to know who this woman is. My son trusts her completely. Mr. Miller, I will conduct a deeper investigation, but I need to warn you, if she is indeed working undercover, discovering this could put you in a complicated situation." "What kind of situation?" "It depends on who she works for and what the objective of the operation is. If it's a criminal investigation, you might be monitored without knowing. If it's corporate espionage, your business could be compromised." That night, Robert stayed in the office, looking at the contracts spread out on the table. How much confidential information had Clara seen over the last 2 years? How many important phone calls had she overheard? How many sensitive documents had passed through her hands during her daily cleaning of the office? For the first time since hiring her, Robert wondered if the security he felt leaving Matthew with Clara was real or a dangerous illusion built on foundations he did not understand. The New York winter had never seemed so cold. The month of September arrived, bringing the New York spring and a seemingly normal routine that Robert had learned to question. That Thursday morning, while having his usual coffee prepared by Clara, he mentally organized the day's agenda. A meeting at 10 with Japanese investors interested in a project on Wall Street. Lunch with Mr. Robert was meeting with a city councillor to discuss urban planning approvals, and in the afternoon he was finalizing contracts for the most ambitious project of his career, a luxury residential complex that had required 3 years of planning and $22 million in initial investment. "Mr. Robert, I need to leave early today. Sophia has a doctor's appointment at 4, Clara informed, serving scrambled eggs on the porcelain plate that Helen had chosen years ago. "That's fine. What kind of appointment?" Robert asked, observing how she avoided direct eye contact, a behavioral pattern he had begun to notice after weeks of closer observation. "Routine pediatric checkup. She's growing very fast and the doctor wants to monitor her development," Clara replied, wiping her hands on the apron more vigorously than necessary. Robert nodded in agreement, but mentally noted another inconsistency: expensive private pediatricians for the daughter of a housekeeper. The list of inexplicable details about Clara's life was growing by the day. At 9:30, Robert left for the office, leaving Clara alone in the apartment as he routinely did. She had the keys, knew the alarm code, and for 2 years had never given him reason for suspicion, until recently. What Robert didn't know was that 15 minutes after his departure, Clara transformed completely. She swapped her apron for the business attire she kept hidden in a bag in the laundry room, a high-quality grey blazer, well-tailored black pants, and leather shoes that cost more than her supposed monthly salary. Her hair, always tied in a simple bun, was let down and professionally styled. In 5 minutes, the humble housekeeper had vanished, replaced by an elegant woman who could easily mingle in the same social circles as Robert. Clara headed to his office with precise and purposeful movements. From her bag, she pulled out a small digital camera and a USB drive, which she connected to Robert's personal computer, the same computer where he kept confidential contracts, secret proposals, and detailed financial information about all his ventures. For 40 minutes, Clara photographed documents, copied digital files, and examined correspondence that Robert had kept in a folder marked "Strictly Confidential." Her familiarity with computer systems was evident. She navigated through the files with the efficiency of someone trained in digital investigation. Among the documents that caught her attention was a partnership contract with the construction firm Mendonça and Associates for the Wall Street project, including financial clauses that mentioned side payments and off-the-books adjustments, terminology that could indicate questionable practices from a fiscal standpoint. Clara particularly photographed the documents related to municipal approvals, which listed amounts paid as urban consulting that were significantly higher than what would be normal for such services. There was also correspondence with a specific city council member discussing facilitations in the licensing process in exchange for investments in social projects that Clara suspected were fictitious. At 11:15, Clara had finished her real doctor's appointment. She packed away all the equipment, changed back into her housekeeper attire, and resumed her normal domestic activities, meticulously cleaning any trace of her presence in the office. Robert returned for lunch at 2 in the afternoon, finding Clara preparing sandwiches for Matthew and organizing the living room as if nothing had happened. "How was the morning? Did Matthew behave well?" he asked, discreetly observing if anything in his office seemed different. "It was calm. He played video games, and I took the opportunity to do a deep clean in the kitchen," Clara replied naturally. But Robert noticed she avoided looking in the direction of the office. It was at 3:30, when Clara had already left ostensibly for Sophia's doctor's appointment, that Robert discovered the first concrete sign that something was wrong. Looking for the original contracts for the Wall Street project for a final review before the meeting the following week, he found the folder completely empty. Robert felt his blood run cold. Those documents represented months of negotiation, contained confidential information about invested amounts, profit margins, and business strategies that could destroy his business if they fell into the wrong hands. "This can't be happening," he murmured to himself, frantically searching through all the drawers, all the folders, all the places where he might have stored the documents. Nothing. Robert immediately called Marcus. "The documents for my most important project have disappeared. Contracts worth $22 million. Documents that were in a locked folder inside my home office." Mr. Robert, who had access to the office today? Only Clara. She was the only person alone in the house. There was a significant pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Robert, I have completed a deeper investigation into Clara Johnson. You need to come to my office immediately. And please do not confront her about the documents until we talk." Robert arrived at Marcus's office in 40 minutes, driving in a state of anxiety he hadn't experienced since the worst moments of Helen's illness. Marcus greeted him with a serious expression that confirmed Robert's worst fears. "Mr. Robert, Clara Johnson does not exist." "What do you mean she doesn't exist?" The name she uses is fake. The social security number is real, but it was issued only 4 years ago. Before that, there is no record of this person. No birth certificate, no school history, nothing. Robert sat heavily in the leather chair of the investigator's office. But she has a daughter, works, pays bills. Yes, but all of that started 4 years ago. Mr. Robert, people who create new identities are usually running from something very serious, or Marcus hesitated, or working undercover for some official agency. Exactly. And there's more. The school where her daughter studies? The tuition is being paid through a bank transfer from a business account linked to the federal prosecutor's office. Robert felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Federal prosecutor's office? Mr. Robert, there is a strong possibility that Clara is an undercover agent investigating some aspect of your business. But I haven't done anything illegal. Maybe not directly, but if you... Roberto thought immediately of Marcus Anderson, his partner in the Wall Street project. Marcus had always been less scrupulous about the methods to expedite bureaucratic approvals, and Robert admitted to himself that he had preferred not to ask certain questions about how some licenses were obtained so quickly. Marcus, what do I do now? First, don't change anything in your routine. If she senses you suspect something, she might accelerate any operation she's planning. Second, we need to find out exactly what information she has already gathered. What if I'm really the target of a criminal investigation? Marcus looked directly into Robert's eyes. Then you need to decide very quickly if you have something to hide or if you're being used as a bridge to reach truly guilty parties. That night, Robert watched Clara Johnson prepare dinner as she always did, humming softly while seasoning the chicken. Matthew was telling her about his day at school, and she responded with the genuine affection she had always shown. Robert wondered how many of the emotions she displayed were real, and how many were part of a professional performance that had lasted for 2 years. The month of October brought New York an early heat that seemed to foreshadow equally intense revelations. Robert had spent the previous 2 weeks living a double life, externally maintaining the normal routine with Clara, but internally analyzing each of her gestures through the lens of suspicion. That Monday morning, while she prepared coffee with the same dedication as always, he observed how her hands moved with almost surgical precision, a detail that now took on completely different meanings. "Mr. Robert, are you okay? You look tired," Clara commented, serving coffee in the blue porcelain cup he preferred to start his days. "Just some business concerns. Nothing major," Robert replied, studying her face for signs that she knew he knew. But Clara maintained the same serene expression as always, that genuinely concerned look he had learned to associate with maternal care. "If you want to talk about anything, I'm a good listener," she offered. And for a moment, Robert wondered if that offer was part of an investigative strategy or if it stemmed from a real human feeling. At 9 in the morning, after Robert left for a meeting downtown, Clara followed her new routine: physical transformation, access to the office, information gathering. But today there was something different. She had received specific instructions to look for documents related to a specific company, Anderson and Partners, and especially any correspondence with Councilman Anthony Smith. It was during this search that Clara found a folder hidden behind other files, marked only as AS 2024. Inside, she discovered correspondence that completely changed her perception of Robert Miller. The first letter, dated 6 months ago, was from Marcus Anderson to Robert. "Robert, I need you to sign the attached documents. I know you have your reservations about the adjustments necessary to expedite approvals, but that's how the market works. Councilman Smith assured me there won't be any problems as long as we uphold our part of the agreement." Robert's response was stapled behind the letter. "Marcus, I don't feel comfortable with these arrangements. Can we explore alternative legal paths? I don't want to compromise the company's reputation or expose my son to future problems." Clara continued reading, finding a sequence of correspondence that revealed Robert's growing reluctance to participate in corruption schemes and the equally growing pressure from his partners for him to cooperate. The most recent letter, from just 2 weeks ago, was particularly revealing. "Robert, you're being naive. All major ventures work this way. If you don't want to participate, I can find other partners. But remember, you've already signed some documents. Backing out now could be complicated for you." Clara photographed all the material, but for the first time in months of investigation, she felt uncomfortable with her mission. The evidence clearly showed that Robert was being coerced into participating in illegal activities, not leading them. It was noon when Robert unexpectedly returned home. His meeting had been cancelled, and he decided to work from home, partially hoping to catch Clara in some suspicious activity. What he found was completely different from what he expected. Clara was in the office, still dressed in her business attire, photographing documents with professional equipment. But when she saw Robert at the door, instead of panicking or trying to lie, she simply stopped what she was doing and looked him directly in the eye. "Mr. Robert," she said calmly, "I think we need to talk." Robert felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and strange relief. Finally, the truth would be revealed. "Who are you really?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. Clara turned off the camera and sat in the leather chair in the office, the same chair where Robert made important business decisions, now occupied by a woman he was discovering he did not know. "My real name is Clara Mendonça Santos. I'm a prosecutor specializing in financial crimes and corruption," she said, pulling out an official ID from her bag. "I'm leading an investigation into corruption schemes in the New York real estate sector." Robert looked at the ID, processing the information. Prosecutor, not just an agent, but a high-level representative of the judicial system. "You've been investigating me for 2 years, he said, not as a question, but as a bitter statement. "Initially, yes, you were considered a suspect of leading a corruption network involving municipal approvals and money laundering through real estate ventures. And now—" Clara hesitated, and Robert realized that this hesitation was the first genuinely non-professional emotion he had seen from her. "Now we've discovered that you are a victim, not a perpetrator. Marcus Anderson and Councilman Smith are using your company to legitimize dirty money, and you are being manipulated into participating through blackmail and coercion." Robert sat in the other chair, the one he normally, Clara, reserved for clients. The role reversal was symbolically appropriate. "Why did you keep working here after discovering this?" "Because we need evidence against the real culprits, and because—" Clara paused again, clearly struggling with personal issues. "Because? Because at some point during these 2 years, I started to care about you and Matthew. For real." Robert studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation, but finding only a vulnerability that seemed painfully honest. "Is Sophia really your daughter?" "Yes. And everything you saw about my relationship with her is real, just like my affection for Matthew, your ex-husband. He is a federal agent, coordinating the operation with me. We haven't been married for 4 years, but we've maintained a close professional relationship." Robert ran his hands through his hair, trying to organize conflicting emotions. "Clara, I trusted you. I let you take care of my son. And I took care of him. Robert, in the last few months, my biggest concern hasn't been the investigation. It's been how to protect you and Matthew from what's to come." "What's to come?" An operation will be launched in the coming weeks. Marcus Anderson, Councilman Smith, and at least 12 other businessmen will be arrested. You could be indicted as an accomplice, even being a victim. Robert felt the world spinning. His company, built with years of honest work, could be destroyed by associations he hadn't consciously chosen. What do you suggest I do? Cooperate with the investigation. Hand over all the evidence you have about the pressure you faced from Marcus. Agree to testify against them. And if I do that, what happens to my company, to Matthew's future? Clara stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where she had spent 2 years living a lie to uncover painful truths. If you cooperate, we will probably reach a deal. Your company may survive, and Matthew will be protected. And us? Robert asked, surprising himself with the question. Clara turned to face him, and this time he saw tears in her eyes. Robert, I fell in love with you, for real. But I don't know how a relationship can work when it started with so many lies. At that moment, Robert understood that discovering the truth about Clara was just the beginning of a much more complex process. Deciding if the future could be built on the ruins of a past based on deceptions. The week that followed Clara's revelation was the most turbulent of Robert's life since Helen's death. On that Thursday in November, he was sitting in his home office, the same place where so many truths had been hidden and finally revealed, trying to process not only the real identity of the woman who had cared for his son for 2 years, but also the devastating implications for his business and personal future. Clara had agreed to continue working normally until the operation was launched. But the dynamic between them had completely changed. There was no longer the naturalness of morning greetings, nor the automatic trust in small household decisions. Every conversation was laden with unspoken weight. Every silence echoed with unanswered questions. Mr. Robert, Clara entered the office carrying a cup of coffee, but her posture was different, less submissive, more direct. We need to talk about Matthew. Robert looked up from the documents he was reviewing for the 10th time, searching for traces of the manipulation he now knew he had suffered. What about him? He noticed that something changed between us. Yesterday he asked me if you were mad at me and if I was leaving. The information hit Robert like a punch. Throughout the crisis, he had focused on protecting his son from the adult complexities of the situation, but apparently he had not been successful. What did you say? The truth I could tell, that sometimes adults go through difficult times, but that I still liked him very much. Robert watched Clara as she spoke. Even knowing her true identity, he could still see the genuine affection she showed for Matthew. That part, at least, had not been a performance. Clara, I need to understand one thing. When you started working here, what exactly was your goal? Clara sat in the chair across from the desk, assuming, the posture of someone ready for a long and painful conversation. Initially, we believed you were the leader of a money laundering scheme through real estate ventures. My mission was to infiltrate your personal routine, to collect evidence of illicit financial activities. When did you realize you were wrong? Gradually, over the first year, your reactions to Marcus's questions, your hesitation to sign certain documents, the way you meticulously reviewed all contracts looking for legal issues. None of that matched the profile of someone who was consciously running criminal operations. Robert remembered the meetings with Marcus, how he always felt uncomfortable with his partner's suggestions to speed up bureaucratic processes. Now he understood that his moral instincts had been more accurate than his business trust. Why didn't you end the investigation when you realized my innocence? Clara sighed deeply. Because we discovered that you were the perfect cover for Marcus's operations. A respected businessman with no criminal record, solid reputation in the market. They were using your credibility to lend legitimacy to their dirty business. And you decided to keep me as bait. We decided to use the situation to collect evidence against the real criminals. Robert, if we had revealed the investigation prematurely, Marcus and the others would have simply changed their strategy. You would have been abandoned as a partner, but they would have continued operating through other people. Robert stood up and walked to the window. The view of the Upper East Side, which had always represented success earned through honest work, now seemed tainted by the discovery that part of that success had been built on foundations he did not fully understand. Clara, I need to know, how much of what happened between us was real? The question hung in the air like a confession of a vulnerability that Robert had not planned to make. What do you mean? The moments when you showed concern for me, when you took care of Matthew during his fever, when we talked about his education, was it part of the investigation or was it real? Clara stood up as well, moving closer to the window but keeping enough distance so they wouldn't touch. Robert, in the first 6 months, everything was professional. I was playing a role, gathering information, maintaining cover. But at some point, probably when I saw how desperate you became during Matthew's fever, something changed. What do you mean it changed? I started to genuinely care about both of your well-being. When Matthew told me about nightmares he had about losing his father like he lost his mother, I felt a real need to protect him. When you worked late and forgot to have dinner, I truly worried about your health. Robert turned to face her. And your feelings? For me? Clara hesitated, clearly struggling between professional honesty and personal vulnerability. They started as a consequence of our time together. You are an upright man, Robert, a devoted father, a businessman who cares about the social impact of his ventures, someone who treats employees with genuine respect. It was impossible not to develop admiration, and then something more. When did you realize you were falling in love? Last Father's Day. You were at the office, looking at a photo of Helen with Matthew, and you said to me, Clara, sometimes I wonder if I'm being a good father to him. There was so much vulnerability in that question, so much need for approval, that I wanted to hug you and tell you that you were an extraordinary father. Robert remembered that moment. It had been one of his hardest days, when the longing for Helen mixed with insecurities about single parenthood. You didn't hug me, because I knew that if I did, I would be crossing a line I shouldn't cross. I was there as an investigator, not as a woman interested in you. And now, what is your position now? Clara walked back to the chair but didn't sit down. She remained standing like someone ready to leave quickly if necessary. Now, I'm in love with a man I have to help prosecute people he considered trusted partners. I'm in a situation where my personal feelings could compromise my professional judgment and where my honesty could destroy any possibility of a future between us. Robert absorbed her words, recognizing the desperate complexity of the situation. Clara, if you weren't a prosecutor, if we had met under different circumstances, do you think we could have had something real? Robert, what I feel for you is real. The circumstances that brought us together were artificial, but the feelings we've developed are genuine. At that moment, for the first time in a week, Robert looked at Clara not as the investigator who had invaded his life, but as the woman for whom he had begun to develop feelings he preferred not to examine too deeply. What do we do now? Now you cooperate with the investigation, I ensure your legal protection, and then we find out if it's possible to build something real from the rubble of so many lies. Robert realized that his response to this proposal would define not only his legal future, but also his chances of finding something resembling love again. The dawn of December 15th arrived in New York, with the heavy humidity that precedes summer storms. Robert had slept only 3 hours, waking repeatedly from nightmares where men in suits invaded his home, taking Matthew away. It was 5 in the morning when his phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Robert, it's Clara. I need you to stay calm and listen carefully." Her voice sounded different, firmer, more official, laden with the authority he now knew she had always possessed. "What's happening?" "The operation will be launched today at 7 in the morning. Federal police teams will execute arrest warrants against Marcus Anderson, Councilman Smith, and 12 other suspects. You won't be arrested, but your company will be subject to a search and seizure." Robert sat up in bed, feeling the world spin. He knew this moment would come, but the concrete reality was much more frightening than the expectation. "And Matthew? How do I protect my son from this?" "He can stay at school today. Don't take him home until I give authorization. The media will try to cover everything, and it's better for him to be away from the spotlight." "Clara, will you be there?" There was a long pause. "Yes, I will be coordinating the operation at your company. Robert, when we meet today, I won't be the Clara you know anymore. I will be Prosecutor Clara Johnson, and I need you to treat me as such, at least in front of the other agents." Robert understood. The woman he had fallen in love with would officially disappear that day, replaced by the legal authority that had always existed behind the domestic facade. At 7:15 in the morning, Robert was in the office of MRM Real Estate Ventures, on the 32nd floor of a commercial building on Wall Street, when he heard the elevator open and multiple voices approaching. His heart raced when he recognized one of them. "Mr. Robert Miller?" an unfamiliar male voice asked as he entered the reception area. "That's me. Federal Agent Fernando Santos. We have a search warrant for these premises." Robert looked at the man, approximately 40 years old, with gray hair, an athletic build, and eyes that showed the same sharp intelligence he had learned to recognize in Clara. Her ex-husband. "Mr. Miller," a familiar female voice echoed behind the agent, and Robert turned to see Clara entering the office. She wore a pristine navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her posture straight, radiating absolute authority. This was Prosecutor Clara Johnson, a woman Robert recognized only partially as the person who had made him coffee for 2 years. "Prosecutor Johnson," Robert replied formally, noticing how she avoided prolonged eye contact. "Mr. Miller, are you aware of the reasons for this operation?" "I am aware that my company, it was used without my knowledge for activities I did not approve of." Clara waved to 2 agents who began examining files and computers. "Mr. Miller, I need you to accompany us to testify as a cooperating witness. Your lawyers may be present." During the next 3 hours, Robert provided detailed testimony about his interactions with Marcus Anderson, the pressures he faced to participate in schemes he considered questionable, and the documents that proved his reluctance to cooperate with illegal activities. Clara conducted the interrogation with absolute professionalism, asking questions that Robert knew were necessary for his legal protection, but which sounded coldly distant considering the intimacy they had developed. "Mr. Miller, at any point, did you suspect that documents were being photographed or copied in your residence?" Clara asked. And Robert understood that she was creating an official record that would protect him from accusations of complicity. "No, prosecutor. I completely trusted the person responsible for cleaning and organizing the documents." "And did this person have unrestricted access to your personal files?" Robert looked directly into Clara's eyes for the first time that morning. "Yes, total trust." By around 3 in the afternoon, the operation was complete. Marcus Anderson had been caught red-handed trying to destroy documents in his office. Councilman Smith had been found at his home, with over $200,000 in cash. Other business people had been arrested at various points throughout the city. Clara finally found herself alone with Robert in the federal police meeting room. "It's over," she said, removing her blazer and revealing an expression of exhaustion that contradicted her impeccable professional appearance. "And now? Now you are free from any charges. Your company will need to undergo an audit, but with your cooperation and the evidence we collected, you should be able to keep the business running." "And us?" Robert asked for the second time in a week. Clara sat in the chair next to him and for the first time that day allowed her guard to drop completely. "Robert, I spent 2 years lying to you about who I was. How do we build trust after that? Maybe starting with total honesty. Then I will be completely honest. I am in love with you, but I'm afraid that you will never be able to separate the woman you love from the investigator who invaded your life." Robert took her hand, the same hand that had prepared thousands of meals for her son, that had cared for him during his fever, that had photographed his most confidential documents. "Clara, the woman I fell in love with is you. All of you, including your professional integrity, your dedication to justice, and yes, including your ability to make difficult choices to protect innocent people. Even knowing that I lied to you for 2 years? You lied about your identity, but you were sincere about your feelings. And Clara, you saved me. If it weren't for your investigation, I could have been destroyed along with Marcus." In that moment, in the austere environment of the federal precinct, surrounded by evidence of crimes that could have destroyed Robert's life, he understood that sometimes love grows precisely because of complexities, not despite them. "Robert, if we decide to try to build something together, it will be difficult. My career, your company, the kids, all of this will be complicated." "But possible," Clara smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her that day. "Possible." January 2025 arrived in the United States, bringing not only the intense heat of summer, but also the media exposure that Robert had feared since the beginning of the investigation. On that Monday, January 20th, he woke up to his phone ringing incessantly, journalists, concerned investors, clients questioning the integrity of his ventures, and curious onlookers wanting details about the case of the businessman and the infiltrated prosecutor. The headline of the country's largest economic newspaper read, "Upper East Side businessman maintains relationship with prosecutor who investigated him." The photo, taken by paparazzi outside the federal police building, showed Robert and Clara walking together, their hands intertwined in a moment of vulnerability that was now exposed to public judgment. "Dad, why are people talking about us on TV?" Matthew asked during breakfast, his 10 years unable to comprehend why his family life had become a matter of national interest. Robert looked at the kitchen television, where a morning show was discussing conflicts of interest in criminal investigations, using his relationship with Clara as an example. He immediately turned off the device. "It's complicated, son. Sometimes adults do things that other people don't fully understand. Did Aunt Clara do something wrong?" The question hit Robert like a punch. How could he explain to a child that the woman he loved had spent 2 years collecting evidence against people close to the family, even if it was to protect them? "No, Matthew. Aunt Clara was doing her job, which was to protect people like us." That morning, Clara faced her own challenges. At the federal prosecutor's office, she was being summoned for a meeting with the Internal Affairs to explain her conduct during the investigation. "Prosecutor Johnson," said Mr. Henry Thompson, the chief internal auditor, a 60-year-old man whose career had been built on a reputation for absolute ethical rigor. "I need to understand how a professional investigation evolved into a personal relationship." Clara, wearing the same navy blue suit she had worn during the operation, maintained a firm posture despite the pressure. "Mr. Thompson, at no point did my personal feelings compromise the investigation. All the evidence collected was obtained legally, and the result was the arrest of the real criminals. But you developed an intimate relationship with the target of the investigation. I developed feelings for a person we discovered to be a victim, not a perpetrator, and those feelings were only revealed after the official conclusion of the operation. Prosecutor, the Federal Prosecutor's Office cannot be associated with scandals that question our impartiality. Clara understood that she was not only being judged for her professional conduct but also for her personal choices. Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, my personal life cannot be subordinated to institutional appearances. I acted within. I fulfilled my duty and protected an innocent citizen. While Clara faced institutional questioning, Robert dealt with the collapse of his business reputation. 3 important clients had cancelled contracts that morning, citing image issues. Japanese investors interested in the Wall Street project requested a reassessment of the situation before proceeding. His phone rang with a call from Frank Smith, Clara's ex-husband and the officer in charge of the operation. "Robert, you need to come to my office. Urgent." "What kind of urgency?" "The kind that can protect you and Clara from the damage the media exposure is causing." An hour later, Robert was in Frank's office, impressed with how Clara's ex-husband managed to maintain professional neutrality despite the complex personal situation. "Robert, the media exposure is hurting both of you. Clara may face disciplinary action, and you are losing business. We need a strategy." "What kind of strategy?" Frank showed a folder with newspaper clippings, social media screenshots, and media impact analyses. "Look at this. Prosecutor infiltrates businessman's home and falls in love with the target. Forbidden romance during criminal investigation. Conflict of interest in the district attorney's office. The narrative is being constructed as if you both acted unethically. But we didn't. Not according to the law, but according to public perception, yes. Robert, I need to ask you something. Is what you feel for Clara worth facing all of this?" The question echoed in the silence of the office. Robert thought about the last 3 years since Helen's death, the loneliness that had become his constant companion, and how Clara had brought life back into his home and heart. "It is." "Then you both need to publicly acknowledge the relationship, but in a way that demonstrates integrity from both sides. How? A joint interview. You tell the whole story. How the investigation protected you. How the feelings developed after the truth was revealed. How you plan to handle conflicts of interest in the future." Robert considered the proposal. Controlled public exposure versus uncontrolled media speculation. And Clara, would she agree to this? She is facing possible disciplinary action. A public narrative that shows her integrity could be the difference between keeping her career or being forced to resign. That afternoon, Robert called Clara for the first time since the operation was launched. "Clara, I need to see you. Not as a prosecutor, not as a witness, but as the woman I love, who is facing consequences for the feelings we share." They met at Robert's apartment. Clara arrived wearing casual clothes, jeans and a simple top, looking more vulnerable than Robert had seen her since her identity was revealed. "Robert, maybe we made a mistake," she said before even sitting down. "What kind of mistake?" "Believing we could build something personal out of such a complex professional situation." Robert embraced her, feeling her tremble slightly, not from cold, but from emotional exhaustion. "Clara, you saved my professional life and brought meaning back to my personal life. If this is a mistake, it's the kind of mistake I choose to make. But what if I lose my career? What if you lose your business? What if we expose our children to public scrutiny that they don't deserve?" Robert held her face in his hands. "Then we will face all of this together. Clara, you taught me that sometimes the right choice isn't the easiest one, but it's the one that allows us to sleep in peace." That night, they made the decision that would define not only the future of their relationship, but also their respective careers, to face public exposure head-on, betting that the truth would be stronger than speculation. February arrived in New York with the torrential rains characteristic of late winter, and Robert watched the drops sliding down the armored windows of his apartment while waiting for Clara to arrive for the conversation that would define their future. It was 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, exactly 6 weeks after the operation that had changed their lives forever. The doorbell rang, and Robert opened the door to find Clara wearing a simple light blue dress, carrying a folder of documents and an expression of determination that he had learned to recognize when she made difficult decisions. "Robert," she said, entering the apartment she had known intimately as a staff member, then as an investigator, and now as the woman he loved. "We need to talk about our situation." They sat in the living room, in the same spot where Clara had served coffee during hundreds of mornings, where Matthew had played with Sophia, where an improvised family had formed without anyone fully realizing what was happening. "What did internal affairs decide?" Robert asked, noticing how Clara held the folder with excessive firmness. "A 6-month suspension without pay and mandatory transfer to another district when I return," Clara replied, her voice maintaining professional firmness even while reporting what was clearly a devastating punishment for her career. Robert felt anger rising in his chest. "They are punishing you for doing your job correctly. They are punishing a prosecutor who became emotionally involved with a target of investigation. From an institutional point of view, they are right. And from a human point of view?" Clara opened the folder and pulled out an official sheet with the district attorney's office letterhead. "From a human point of view, Robert, I need to make a decision I never imagined I would have to make." Robert looked at the document, immediately recognizing what it was, a formal resignation request. "Clara, no." "Robert, over the last 6 weeks, I've lost 3 important cases because other prosecutors question my impartiality. 2 judges requested my replacement in cases I had been handling for months. My professional credibility is destroyed. But this will pass. People forget new cases will prove your competence." Clara stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where she had built a 15-year career. In the judiciary, Robert, yesterday Sophia came home crying because a schoolmate said her mum was the prosecutor who dated criminals. The information hit Robert like a punch. He had focused so much on protecting Matthew that he hadn't fully considered how Sophia was being affected. "Clara, that's unfair. You didn't date criminals, you protected victims." "But that's not how the story is being told. And Robert, it's not fair to Sophia that she carries the weight of my professional and personal choices." Robert moved closer to the window, standing next to Clara without touching her, respecting the space she clearly needed to think. "What are you proposing?" Clara took a deep breath, and Robert realized she had rehearsed this conversation mentally many times. "I'm going to resign from the district attorney's office, open a criminal defense law firm, work as a criminal lawyer defending people in situations similar to what you faced." "And us?" Clara finally turned to face him directly. "Robert, in the last 2 months I've discovered that building a relationship on such a foundation of trauma is harder than I imagined." Robert felt his heart race, recognizing the tone Clara used when she was about to make irreversible decisions. "Are you breaking up with me?" "I'm saying that maybe we need time and distance to figure out if what we feel is real love or an emotional consequence of an extreme situation." Robert sat in the armchair where Helen used to read to Matthew, the same spot where Clara had often observed the family dynamics she had set out to investigate. "Clara, what do you mean by time and distance?" "I mean, I'm going to move with Sophia to San Jose, where my sister lives. I'm going to open an office there, rebuild my professional life away from all this media scrutiny. And then, if in a year we still feel we have something real, we can try again. Without external pressure, without recent trauma, without the complications of a criminal investigation. Robert processed the proposal, understanding her logic but emotionally resisting the idea of separation. Clara, what if a year apart makes us realize it was all circumstantial? What if we lose what we have that's real, trying to figure out if it's real? Clara moved closer to him, kneeling beside the armchair and taking his hands. Robert, in the last 2 months, every time you look at me, I see questions. You wonder if a certain gesture of mine is genuine or calculated, if a certain opinion is mine or that of the investigator I used to be. And I wonder if your feelings for me are real or gratitude for having been protected. Robert recognized the painful truth in her words. And do you think a year will resolve this? I think a year will give us perspective. And if after that time we still want to be together, it will be because we consciously chose to, not because we were pushed by circumstances. That night, after Clara left with her last personal belongings from the apartment, Robert explained to Matthew that Aunt Clara needed to move to another city for work. But will she come back? Matthew asked, and Robert realized he didn't know how to answer. I hope so, son, I hope so. 3 days later, Robert was at the airport, watching Clara and Sophia board a flight to San Jose. At the moment of farewell, Clara hugged him tightly. Robert, if this is real, it will withstand the test of time. If not, it's better we find out now. And what? If I say I'm sure it's real, then prove it to me in a year. Robert watched the plane take off, carrying the woman who had transformed his life in ways he had never imagined possible. For the first time in months, he was completely alone with his choices and their consequences. The journey that had begun with a child playing hide-and-seek and discovering adult secrets would now continue with 2 adults trying to figure out if love could survive the truth. February 2026 arrived in New York, bringing the same humid warmth as the previous year, but Robert Miller was a completely different man from the one who had discovered Clara's true identity 12 months earlier. Sitting in his renovated office, now with transparent glass walls, symbolizing the transparency that had become the pillar of his business, he was reviewing the annual report of MRM Real Estate Ventures, which had not only survived the scandal, but thrived with a new business philosophy. "Dad! Sophia called!" Matthew shouted from the hallway, running with the phone in his hands and a smile that Robert hadn't seen in a long time. At 11 years old, the boy had visibly grown during that challenging year, developing an emotional maturity that sometimes surprised his father. Robert felt his heart race. During the 12 months of separation, Clara had kept regular contact with Matthew, calling every week to check on school, friends, and the dreams and fears of a boy she had helped raise during 2 crucial years of his life. But for Robert, she had only sent occasional messages, professional updates on cases she thought might interest him, and birthday cards that were warm yet carefully neutral. "She wants to talk to you too," Matthew said, handing over the phone with the expectation of someone who had spent a year hoping the important adults in his life would find their way back to each other. Robert took the phone with hands that trembled slightly. "Hi, Clara." "Hi, Robert." Her voice sounded different, more mature, more confident, but carrying a warmth he had missed every day of that year. "How are you?" "Well, the office is running. Sophia has adapted very well to her new school, and I've learned some things about myself this year." "What kind of things?" There was a long pause, and Robert could imagine Clara on the other end of the line, choosing her words with the care she always showed when the topics were emotionally significant. "I've learned that spending a year away from you two It didn't diminish what I feel. In fact, it helped me understand that what we have is real, not circumstantial. Robert closed his eyes, feeling a relief he had waited for 365 days. "Clara, can I come see you?" "Actually, Robert, I was thinking of coming to see you if you want." "When?" "How about this afternoon? Sophia wants to catch up with Matthew, and I want to talk to you." 3 hours later, Robert was waiting in the arrivals hall of LaGuardia Airport, wearing the blue shirt that Clara always said highlighted his eyes, carrying flowers he had impulsively bought, white daisies, her favorites, a detail he had memorized during their 2 years together. When he saw Clara and Sophia coming out of the arrivals area, Robert had to lean against the wall for a moment. Clara looked different, more elegant, more confident, wearing a green dress he had never seen before, but that stunningly accentuated her eyes. Her hair was longer, and she moved with a naturalness that Robert recognized as someone who had made peace with herself. Sophia ran toward him before Clara could say anything. "Uncle Robert, I missed you so much," the girl shouted, throwing herself into his arms with the spontaneity of a 9-year-old who hadn't lost affection for someone important, despite the separation. Robert hugged Sophia, feeling how much she had grown over the past year, but noticing that her smile remained the same, that blend of precocious intelligence and genuine sweetness that had won his heart from day one. "Sophia, you're so big and so beautiful," Robert said, genuinely, moved to see the girl who had practically become a daughter during the 2 years Clara had worked in his home. Clara approached more slowly, observing the interaction between Robert and her daughter with an expression that mixed affection, nostalgia, and a hint of nervousness. "Hi, Robert," she said when she got close enough for him to smell the perfume she was wearing, different from the previous one, more sophisticated, but it suited her perfectly. "Hi, Clara," Robert replied, extending the flowers. "Welcome back." She accepted the daisies with a smile that completely lit up her face. "You remembered." "I remembered everything." During the ride to the apartment, Sophia and Matthew chatted excitedly in the back seat of the car, updating each other on the past year of their lives with the ease of children who maintain true friendships despite distance. Robert and Clara remained relatively silent, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with positive anticipation instead of the tension that had marked their last encounters. "Robert," Clara said when they stopped at the traffic light on 5th Avenue, "I need to tell you about the office. How's it going?" "Better than I imagined. I have 15 active cases, 3 assistants, and a solid reputation defending people who were unjustly accused of financial crimes." Robert smiled. "You found your calling." "I found a way to use my experience as a prosecutor to help people in the situation you were in. It's satisfying in a way I didn't expect." When they arrived at the apartment, the children immediately ran to Matthew's room to check out the new video games and toys he had accumulated over the year. Robert and Clara were left alone in the living room, the same space where they had shared morning coffee, devastating revelations, and the decision to temporarily separate. "Robert, this place is different," Clara observed, noticing the changes in the decor, the new photos on the walls, the overall feeling of renewal that permeated the environment. "I changed a lot. I wanted it to reflect who I've become this year." "And who have you become?" Robert sat in the armchair where Helen used to read, where Clara had observed her family, where he had made some of the most important decisions of his life. Someone who learned that transparency is not just a business strategy, but a way of life. Someone who discovered that it is possible to build profitable businesses without compromising ethical principles. And someone who spent 365 days discovering that loving you was not a consequence of traumatic circumstances, but a conscious choice. Clara sat on the sofa, keeping enough distance for them to talk comfortably, but close enough for Robert to see the small changes in her face that indicated growth and self-discovery. "Robert, I also learned important things this year." "Like what?" "I learned that building a career from scratch after 40 is daunting but liberating. I learned that Sophia is more resilient than I imagined, and that she never stopped asking when we were going to visit Uncle Robert and Matthew. And I learned that you are right about our feelings being a choice, not circumstance." Robert felt hope growing in his chest. "Clara, this year was the longest of my life. It was for me, too. Robert, do you want to try again?" "I do, but this time, no secrets, no investigations, no external pressures. Just the two of us, being honest about who we are and what we want." Clara stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where they had met under circumstances neither of them could have predicted. "Robert, if we stay together, it will be complicated. My career, your business, our children, all the practical challenges still exist. But now we know how to face them." Clara turned to face him, and Robert saw in her eyes the same determination he had recognized on the first day he discovered her true identity. "Robert Miller, will you marry me?" The question came so directly and unexpectedly that Robert needed a few seconds to process what he had heard. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am, because I spent an entire year discovering that I want to build a life with you. A real life, based on conscious choices and true love." Robert stood up, walked over to Clara, and kissed her for the first time since she had left for San Jose. "Clara Johnson, yes, I want to marry you." From Matthew's room came the sound of laughter and lively conversations. Sophia and Matthew celebrating their reunion with the spontaneity of childhood. In the living room, two adults who had discovered love through impossible circumstances were finally finding their way to build a possible future. 2 years after a child uncovered adult secrets while playing hide-and-seek, two families finally stopped hiding and chose to come together.